And welcome to our second ever digital support group for people with glaucoma. My name's Jo Bradley and I'm Head of Support Services at Glaucoma UK, which used to be known as the International Glaucoma Association. We have here, you can hopefully see him on screen in his scrubs, just to show he's really a doctor, Dr Hari Jayaram from Moorfields Eye Hospital in London. He's going to be talking to us about glaucoma for the newly diagnosed. So thank him. Let's say thank you to Hari. I'm just going to talk a little bit through some of the functionality in Zoom first, because I know lots of you might be quite new to this, and talk a little tiny bit about Glaucoma UK, and then I'll be handing the reins over to Hari. So if you kind of wiggle your mouse or touch your screen, you should be able to see that there is some buttons at the bottom. You can raise your hand if you want to say something. You're all muted currently. If you raise your hand, one of us will ask if you want to ask a question by sort of not typing if you're a slow typer. If you and we'll unmute you in that case. If you look at the bottom as well, there's a Q&A button. If you click that, there is options to type in your questions. Hari and I will be keeping an eye on that, so we can we'll be sort of having that as a conversation. We can ask questions on your behalf. Even if you haven't asked a question, it's worth looking in that button, because you can like questions that you like. We'll be able to see which ones are the most popular, so we can make sure we're answering the questions that are of most interest to all of you. There is also a poll button, so I'm going to activate that now. This is just a little start point about what do you know about glaucoma already. So hopefully that should open as a window. It's just 3 quick questions, if you can have a go at answering those. So that's a poll button at the bottom of your screen now. If you click on that poll, great, I can see one person's done it. Just give you a couple of minutes. So that will be up for about 10 minutes, just to see what you know about glaucoma already. Hopefully it's all super straightforward, but if you are having difficulties, you can raise your hand, and we can see who's raised their hand, and we can ask you, sort of check in with you and hope that you're okay. Just so you know, this is also being streamed live on Facebook as we speak. So if you do, if you ask a question live, obviously your voice will go out, and you'll be streamed live on Facebook as we speak. So I'm just going to talk really briefly about us as an organisation, because some of you might know quite a lot about us. Some of you might not know much at all. So we are Glaucoma UK. Until about 10 days ago, we were known as the IGA. Hopefully you can see that. So until about 10 days ago, we were known as the IGA. We do lots of things to help people with glaucoma. Our mission is to stop preventable sight loss due to glaucoma. So we do 3 different things, so 3 different pillars of activity. Campaigning and awareness, so that's reaching out to the general population, telling them about glaucoma, making sure people get their eyes tested, because if you get diagnosed with glaucoma, you can stop it and hopefully you won't lose your sight. We also provide advice and support to people with glaucoma, so that those of you who have it live well, stay well, manage your condition well, understand what's happening, and again, hopefully not lose significant amounts of sight. And the other thing we do is fund research into glaucoma. So that's funding research into diagnosis, care, treatment, prevention, anything to do with glaucoma, so that hopefully people won't lose their sight due to glaucoma. So this is the first support group this is the second support group that we've run. We're very excited about it. Obviously it's happened because of COVID, because we can't do our face-to-face support groups that normally happen, but we hope that we can still provide you with the support and information that you need in order to manage your condition well. So please do ask us lots of questions via that Q&A function. We really want to make sure that this is a session that's helpful to you, that it's interesting, that it asks you the things you want to know. We also, because this is a new session, We want to get some feedback, so at the end you will receive a link to a SurveyMonkey evaluation form. Be super grateful if you could fill that in so we can make sure that these sessions work for you. So that's it from me, and I'm going to hand back, if I can work out how to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to hand over to Hari now. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Joanna. So let me see if I can share my screen. So, Joanna, has that come up for you?
Yep, I can see
Okay,
that.
great. So, hi everyone. Thank you so much for the invite to speak to you this evening. Now, this sort of forum is something close to my heart because just before lockdown at Moorfields, we've worked a lot with the IGA in their, so Glaucoma UK and their former guys, and they really are one of the most incredible charities for supporting patients and supporting research. And we've done a lot of work on education, and we all think and we all feel that the more that an individual knows about their condition, the more likely they are to use their treatment and therefore preserve their sight. And this concept of a education session for people that are newly diagnosed with glaucoma is something that we really wanted to implement at Moorfields, and we piloted it once or twice, and then the pandemic hit. So I was very pleased when Joe got in touch with me. Now, to talk to you about glaucoma in half an hour is probably impossible. I have tried to structure things to make it a little bit interesting for you, really talk about some basic things, but there are lots of things I won't have covered, and I really do want you to use this opportunity to ask anything you like. You can literally ask anything, and hopefully you'll find this session rewarding. So I guess the first question is, what is glaucoma? Now, glaucoma is a broad sort of umbrella term, and essentially, glaucoma refers to any sort of eye condition where there is some damage with the nerve that connects the eye to the brain, and this usually is associated with damage to the field of vision and characteristic appearances when we look at the optic nerve and when we shine the lights in. And one thing that's interesting to note is that it is usually associated with high eye pressure, but not always. But even now, despite having known about this condition for hundreds of years, treating the eye pressure by lowering it is the only risk factor that we're able to address. So current treatment methods are all focused on lowering the eye pressure. Now, just to try and explain how glaucoma normally develops. So the fluid in the eye I'm not sure if hopefully you can see my little arrow here. So the fluid in the eye is produced where my arrow is here, so in the middle, and it filters out through this opening, which is your pupil, and it drains out just at the front of the eye here. So it's sort of like the river flows from the back to the front. Now, if the drain pipes don't clear properly, that means that the taps are on, so there's more fluid produced, and therefore the eye pressure becomes higher. Now, the impact of higher eye pressure is actually at the back of the eye, because if you imagine the eyeball, it's pretty solid. The whites of our eyes are made of very, very tough tissue, but there is one natural area of weakness, and that's at the back, where there has to be an opening for the nerve fibers to leave the eyeball and go to the brain. So that natural point of weakness is where the optic nerve is formed and leaves the eye. And that's where high pressure causes damage to the nerve cells just at the point where they leave the eye to connect to the brain. Now, the worrying thing about glaucoma is that people don't experience any symptoms. It's very, very unusual. There is a subtype of glaucoma, which we call acute glaucoma, where the pressure may be very, very high, and individuals may have nausea and vomiting and headaches. But that's that is a sort of the minority of the presentation. Most time people don't have any symptoms at all, and these findings are picked up at a visit to your local optician, for example. Now, I think the difference between screening and visits to your opticians now compared to, let's say, 30, 40 years ago is very, very different. Knowledge and public awareness, largely due to charities like the IGA or Glaucoma UK, really have promoted the awareness of glaucoma. So all high street opticians will look for signs. So we do find that patients are being picked up much, much earlier now compared to 30 or 40 years ago. So the advantage of diagnosing something early is that you can treat something before you develop symptoms. Now, the reason you don't notice anything is, first of all, we have two eyes. So if one eye is affected, you wouldn't really know unless you covered up the other eye. So even if you've lost a lot of vision in one eye, lots of people don't notice until you, let's say, accidentally cover one eye and notice that the other one's not so good. And it happens very slowly and gradually. So sight loss from glaucoma isn't something that happens overnight. It happens over months and years. And as human beings, we're very sensitive to sudden changes, but not for very subtle and gradual things. So glaucoma is often referred to as the silent thief of sight, which is quite an apt description. I think this really highlights, first of all, for all of us, whether we have glaucoma or not, the importance of regular eye tests just as a checkup, even if it's just once a year. And for those people that do have glaucoma, the importance of attending your hospital visits and putting medication in. Now, anyone can develop glaucoma, but that we do know that certain groups of people are more at risk. Glaucoma is much more common as we get older. In terms of research, it's often been argued that glaucoma is maybe a normal variant of the aging process because of what we find. So it is more common as we get older. Certain ethnicities are known to be at greater risk. If you have a parent or a sibling with glaucoma, you are at higher risk also. And then also extremes of refraction. So, you know, if you've got very thick glasses for either distance or near, you're more at risk. Now, we do know that medical conditions can be linked with glaucoma as well. If people have had accidents or injuries to the eye, and very, very commonly, people that are using steroid tablets. Let's say if you have polymyalgia or arthritis, you may be on some steroid tablets. Or even more, and more common actually, would be if you have sort of blocked up sinuses and you use nasal sprays. Nasal sprays can cause high pressure. So there are lots of people that are more susceptible. Now, the aim of treatment, as a glaucoma doctor, my main aim is to make sure that we can preserve the vision of our patients so that essentially you can live a full and normal life. We want to make sure that we prevent any further damage to your sight that may have happened. And we want to make sure that whatever treatments or interventions that you have the lowest risk and the minimal amount of side effects. So it's really all about letting you live your life to its full without the condition getting in the way. And one thing that we're always asked is about vision that's lost from glaucoma. Are we able to replace that? Now, unfortunately, at the moment, we don't have the technology or scientific knowledge to restore lost sight. Although there is promising work in the laboratories, but this isn't something that is going to be imminently due for clinical trials. I wouldn't have thought for at least another 10, 20 years. So in reality, it's really important to treat the condition now to make sure that we don't lose anything. Now, in terms of treatments for glaucoma, these are all focused at the moment on lowering eye pressure. The first type of treatment would be either laser or eye drops. And many years down the line, if we struggle to control the eye pressure and we find that sight is being affected, we have a lot of different types of surgical procedures that can be used. Now, a common type of laser is known as selective laser trabeculoplasty, or you'll hear people talk about SLT. And this is something that is commonly used for newly diagnosed glaucoma. And this is something that has its advantages. It can be performed in the clinic. It doesn't hurt. It takes about 10 minutes. And what's nice about this is it means it can lower your eye pressure for about 2 to 3 years without the need for any drops. There's always the option for this to be repeated. And it's been shown that this may in fact reduce the need for surgery over the years. And it's something that patients always ask me, if you had a diagnosis of glaucoma, what would you have? And my answer would be definitely to try the laser first, because the main risk is that it doesn't work. So I think if anyone that's newly diagnosed, if your doctor hasn't discussed SLT, next time you see them, I would definitely raise that question. Now, the reason we talk about this is that at Moorfields, one of my colleagues, Professor Gazard, led a very, very large clinical trial that went on for 6 years, and it compared laser versus drops as the first treatment. And this really showed that it was very, very effective in terms of almost 3/4 of patients didn't need any drops, and there were much, much fewer side effects from drops. So laser is a good option, and I would strongly commend that anyone that has a new diagnosis, or even if you're using drops, please discuss this with your glaucoma specialist. Now, eye drops, there are a huge host of eye drops. This was just a selection that I found on a shelf and managed to fit into a single picture, but there are huge amounts of eye drops that all work in very, very different ways. And I just want to try and simplify this for you. This is a little diagram about, again, it's like we showed earlier on. This is the fluid is produced here, it comes out through the pupil, and it drains away just in the front of the eye. Now, I think the broad principle for eye drops, which I think all patients just should be aware of, is they work in 2 ways. Now, the first way is they will turn off the tap. So some of the drops you use, for example, if there's a commonly used drop called Cosopt or Tiapex or Timolol, these ones reduce the amount of fluid that the eye produces. So therefore the pressure comes down. This is sort of turning off the tap. The other drops that are commonly used are things like latanoprost or bimatoprost, and these drops actually make the drains sort of widen a little bit and make the eye more efficient at filtering fluid away, and therefore lower the pressure. And interestingly, this is the same way that the SLT laser works. The laser causes the drain pipe to stretch a little bit, and it opens the pores that the fluid drains out through and lowers the pressure. Now, here I've just a couple of questions that people quite often ask us at new diagnosis, and this is only the tip of the iceberg, and I would love you to sort of chip in later on with some questions of your own. The first thing, it's always a bit unknown, and we really understand and empathise that when somebody tells you you have glaucoma, it can be terrifying. And one of the purposes of these sessions organised by Glaucoma UK is to try to reassure you that this isn't something to be scared of. The fact that it has been picked up early is usually very, very promising, and hopefully will be reassuring to you. But on a practical level, what will happen to you? Well, you would normally attend for some tests at your local clinic. And this would usually involve your eye pressure, a field of vision test, and maybe a scan of the nerve. And this can happen usually between 1 or 3 times per year. It's quite common to have more frequent visits early on when you're diagnosed, just so your doctor can make sure that the drops or laser or the treatment you're having is being effective. And once we're confident that the treatment is working well, then we don't need to see you so often. So you may be seen 1 or 2 times per year after that. And typically what happens is, these tests will be reviewed by a glaucoma consultant who will then advise you on what your treatment is and discuss other options with you. And I'll talk a little bit later about how this may change in response to the pandemic. And essentially, as your condition becomes more stable, and basically that just means the doctor, your glaucoma specialist, is happy with how things are, there is no change to your field of vision, the frequency of how often you need to come will reduce. Now, I mentioned earlier that glaucoma covers all sorts of conditions where there is damage to the nerve connecting the eye and the brain, with characteristic appearances of the nerve and on the field test. And I think it's really important for all people with glaucoma to ask their doctor about the type of glaucoma you have. Now, sometimes it can be associated with other conditions. So we talked about the impact of steroids. So people who have sinus problems and may inhale steroids for their nasal passageways can have high eye pressure, and we would call this secondary glaucoma. And in fact, the IGA have on their website, Glaucoma UK on their website have a fantastic selection of information booklets that talk about the different types of glaucoma. Now, if there is no other medical conditions associated or eye conditions, we call this primary. And this is sort of medical speak for, it's the way you're made, there's no other underlying reason. So glaucoma is usually categorized as primary or secondary. And I would really recommend that you early on ask your doctor about the type of glaucoma you have. And also, please do look at the Glaucoma UK website, because there are the information booklets you can download in electronic form also. Another question that's commonly asked is, I'm very young, how come I've got glaucoma? Now, this is a graph that was published in 2014, and it shows the effect of age. So we mentioned earlier that as we get older, glaucoma does increase, and this is, you're probably all experts at seeing curves on the news after the pandemic, but you can see here that this is what we call a sort of exponential growth. It's rapidly rising, over the age of from 60 onwards. So yes, glaucoma does happen more commonly as we get older, but it can also happen in younger patients, and we also see it in children, which is rare, but at big specialist centres, it is a common thing that's seen. The other thing to mention is there's a lot of work done into the genetics of glaucoma, and we know that there's about, I think at the moment, there's over 150 individual genes that have been linked to glaucoma. Now, there isn't a single one that means that you will have a problem, but what this does tell us is that there is a familial component to this. So that's why if you have a parent or a sibling that's affected, you are at greater risk and should certainly get checked out by your local optician on an annual basis. A common question we're asked is, will I go blind from glaucoma? And I think if I was a patient, this would be my initial fear if I didn't have any knowledge about the condition. I just want to reassure you that the answer is no for most patients. Blindness from glaucoma does occur, but it is very rare. In the UK, because we have a very good detection and screening system, cases are detected early. And therefore, I think when treatment is started early, we can prevent any loss of sight. And I think this is why improving patient knowledge about the condition and the importance of using drops is so important. And that's why, if you remember when Joanna showed the Glaucoma UK, their 3 aims, it's really about preventable vision loss. And I really do believe that once you know more about the condition, you'll understand the importance of putting the drops in regularly. So this is a teamwork between you and your glaucoma specialist, working together and following the treatment. The majority of our patients will be absolutely fine. Now, the COVID pandemic has really, I'm sure it's affected all of your lives in one way or another, and some of you may have had relatives and loved ones affected also. But in the healthcare setting, it was a very unusual time, especially for us working in a specialist eye hospital. We sort of felt a little bit fraudulent every Thursday when everyone was clapping, because all we were doing was, well, we felt we weren't doing much, as I'll explain, whereas our colleagues in the critical care units were really the ones that deserved the claps, in my opinion. So what happened was, before the pandemic, around 80% of visits at Moorfields involved what we call a face-to-face consultation. So this would involve about a couple of hours spent in the hospital. All the tests we mentioned before would be performed. The waiting rooms are packed, and they were renowned for being busy and overbooked and finishing late. And unfortunately, I suspect many of you may have had this experience prior to the pandemic. So this was this is not unique to Moorfields. I think this would be reflective of most glaucoma clinics across the country. So, end of March, we had to cancel approximately 40,000 appointments, and we cancelled just under 1,000 operation bookings, and this was within a 2-week period. And during the lockdown, we saw glaucoma emergencies only that required surgery. And the challenge we had was balancing the risk of loss of sight versus loss of life. And this was, as you all know from seeing what happened, this was a real, a real issue. We were able to do this because of the electronic medical records, and even the loss of sight. We would talk to patients, and we were, the frightening thing for us was it wasn't about saving the sight in one eye. What quite often decisions made with patients about whether they should come in or not was how is the sight in the other eye. So it was really, it was almost like a wartime footing. It's something we've never had to deal with. But really, you were balancing the loss of sight, assuming both eyes were open, versus loss of life. Now, and we wrote about these experiences, towards the end of April, because we'd never seen anything like it, and essentially we had a blank canvas at Moorfields. So because we'd cancelled 40,000 appointments, and we'd always wanted to make our system more efficient, we had an opportunity to do this because we were being forced to do this, along with other measures, which I'm just going to talk to you about now. Now, the principles of how the pandemic will impact glaucoma care, I think, are twofold. Firstly, the priority of everybody is to maintain the safety and welfare of all of our patients and all of our staff. The second principle is we want to minimize the amount of time that patients have to spend in a hospital or clinic environment. So we want to get people in, get people out. We don't want those hours and hours of sitting around waiting, for the years ahead. So at the moment at Moorfields, even getting through the door is a challenge. There is a queue in the morning that's quite something, and this is for the staff coming in. So everybody is questioned about their any symptoms they may have had, a cough or a fever or loss of taste, smell. Everybody has a temperature checked. Everybody is given hand sanitizer. Masks are provided for all staff and visitors. And in fact, it's mandatory to wear your mask throughout the hospital at all times. Even in the waiting area, we've had to adopt social distancing. So the seating area is markedly different in our glaucoma clinics. We've had to reduce our clinic numbers by around 50% to allow appropriate social distancing. And we've managed to stick to the 2 meters within the outpatient waiting area. And I don't know if you can see, but there are sort of perspex screens around the reception staff. And so, yeah, the clinic numbers are down for that reason. Now, the other interesting innovation, I don't know if you can see on this slit lamp that we use to examine your eyes, there's a sort of piece of perspex here that sort of separates the doctor on this side and the patient on this side. And in fact, I will tell you about this on my next slide, because the other thing, what I want to talk about now is team working. So we used to work under single teams of a single consultant would have a, Mr. Bloggs would have a Wednesday morning and Mr. Smith would have a Tuesday afternoon. Now, because of the nature of the pandemic and making sure we have appropriate cover, and in case somebody is ill, we now work in teams of consultants, and there's teams of 2 to 3 consultants. So something that's different will be that you may not necessarily see a specific named consultant when you come to the clinic, but you will always have 2 to 3 consultant level specialists within the clinic when you are coming. So, and this is something that we've had to adapt for sort of logistical reasons to staff our sites appropriately. Now, this is what I wanted to explain before. So we talk about the face-to-face clinic. So that's what we call the clinic type, where you will come in and physically see a specialist on a slit lamp, as here. So this little piece of perspex is known as a breath guard. So literally, we call them face-to-face clinics, but if you imagine the patient's face is here, the doctor's face is here, it literally is a face-to-face clinic. And interestingly, this concept of a breath guard was shared on a WhatsApp chat group with some colleagues from China who obviously were dealing with this around 2 months before we were. And so all of our slit lamps at Moorfields now have what we call these breath guards to protect staff and patients alike. And this is in addition to both staff and patients wearing masks as well. And what we are trying to do is really to limit and reduce the need for face-to-face clinics. And as you saw, because the waiting room capacity is halved, we have to reduce these. So the kinds of cases that are seen in the face-to-face clinics are really when only essential, i.e. before and after surgery. One of the things that we are moving towards is we always wanted to try to be more efficient and save people waiting and see people in what we call imaging or virtual clinics. And prior to the pandemic, we did run these, and the patient journey was very, very fast, and we had a lot of positive feedback from people that had visits in this nature. So it would take about 40 minutes and you're in and out. What's different now is that almost all of our patients by default, just because we had to cancel 40,000 appointments, are coming through this pathway for the next couple of months. So they'll have all the tests, and then the information is reviewed by the consultants the next day. And then we're using a telephone consultation to discuss care and answer any questions. So this is all about maintaining the consultant-delivered care, but with social distancing to really sort of minimise the risk to our patients. As staff, we're tested regularly. At the moment, there are separate sort of pathways within the hospital and areas for staff that are tested and are negative, which are called green pathways, and staff that are untested or maybe the results aren't back for patients, which we call blue pathways. Anyone coming in for surgery has to self-isolate, and the hospital will send out a home swab test before you'll finally confirm that you're clear to come in. But these are all big organisational changes that we're going through at the moment. Now, my final thing is just to talk about glaucoma research. So I'm, at Moorfields, we're very research active. Half of my weekly time is spent with glaucoma research. I just wanted to talk to you about two ideas that will be coming through shortly, and just to really emphasise how what we do in glaucoma research is driven by you, and we really want to get patients involved with research. We want to listen to your ideas and get your feedback. So as the reason we do research is for you. So we want glaucoma patients to shape our research. And at Moorfields, we have developed a sort of patient-facing website so that you can register your interest, and then we can all work together to with amazing charities like Glaucoma UK to try and make things better for the future. Once that's all set up, I will ask Joe to sort of share that with you, and please do get in touch. So one of the exciting things is this concept of supplements. So the holy grail in glaucoma is there a tablet that you can take that will help protect the optic nerve? Because at the moment, like we've mentioned, we're just treating eye pressure and nothing else. So vitamin B3 is something that's shown promise in early studies, and Professor Garway Heath at Moorfields is planning a larger clinical trial to try and answer the question, is this an effective treatment for glaucoma, in addition to pressure lowering? So this is something to look out for in the next year or two. The other thing that we're exploring is this concept of early cataract surgery as a treatment for glaucoma. Now, around 2/3 of patients will end up having cataract surgery within the first 6 years after diagnosis. We know that cataract surgery reduces the eye pressure for about 5 years by about 5 millimeters of mercury. So, that would be pretty effective. So one of the things that's possible is that early cataract surgery may delay the need for drops or laser and also improve vision at the same time. And this is something that we're trying to develop as a research idea, and hopefully we can get in touch with some of you to try and get your thoughts on this in the future. So finally, before it's time for your questions, glaucoma, once it's diagnosed, can be treated, and I think that's really important to take away. Don't be worried. Don't try not to be anxious. There are treatments, and we can preserve sight. Also, blindness can occur in glaucoma, but it is very rare. If it's a very late presentation, then it is more common in that situation. But in the UK, because of our excellent awareness, because of charities like Glaucoma UK and optometrists, blindness is very, very rare. And we gave you a little taster of how glaucoma clinics will be shaping up over the next couple of months. So if you have been in a glaucoma clinic before, It'll be interesting to hear your experience when you go back, because I think it will be very, very different. We're obviously keen to get patient feedback on how things and your experience of the process. And finally, research into glaucoma is an incredibly exciting area where you really, really can contribute and help shape how its direction, even, you know, not just, I'm not talking about taking part, I'm talking about really designing and developing and just helping us as glaucoma specialists know what's important to you, because, you know, that's, you know, you are the reason that we do research into this sort of area. Okay, and that's all I wanted to say. There's a lot that I could have said, but I thought we'd run out of time. So I'd be delighted to take any questions. You can ask me anything. I think I might regret saying that, but and I think Joe.
Very brave. Yeah, we've had a few questions through. So thank you to people who have contributed, and just a reminder to keep posting your questions in the Q&A, or if you would like to ask a question but you don't feel confident typing, raise your hand and one of us will come to you. So number one question, what do you think is the most important question that a newly diagnosed patient should ask their consultant?
So I think, if I don't know the answer to that, I'm going to answer that as if I was a patient with but happening to have a background of what I know. I would say the first thing I would want to know is what's my risk of significantly having significant sight loss in my lifetime, because that question, I think in about 90% of cases, can provide a lot of reassurance, because we can see that when patients are told they have a diagnosis, they're very worried, and once we look at the fact that it's a very early presentation, almost nothing on the field test, just some subtle changes by a very observant optician, you know, I can then confidently say, you know, that your risk of lifetime vision loss related to glaucoma is very, very low. And you know, you can almost see the burden being lifted from their shoulders. And I think that's the first thing I would want to know, actually.
Great, thank you. So it's a very dependent, isn't it, on that early diagnosis versus a later one would probably be a slightly different answer. But if you're in that early category, then the odds are in your favour.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Great. So another question that we had sent through to us beforehand was, my mum's newly diagnosed. She doesn't want to use her eye drops and says it doesn't matter too much. So does it matter? How important is it to take your eye drops?
So I think the crucial thing about eye drops is, you know, we showed you on the pictures how, you know, how the drops work. They either turn the taps off or they widen the drains, but they will only work, you know, for as long as you put them in. So they're with you know, it's different to sort of some injections, you know, you might need once a month or something. But with eye drops, the way that they are formulated, they'll only last for about 12 to 24 hours. So you do have to put them in regularly. And one of the things that we've learned, you know, in the laboratory from glaucoma is it's all very well having a low pressure at some point, but it's about how long and the duration of time that your optic nerve is exposed to high pressure. And the only way to protect the optic nerve as best we can is to keep the pressure down for as long as we can. So that's why putting the drops in is really, really important. And I think the other thing that, you know, my mum doesn't have glaucoma, but I can imagine my mum saying that. And the thing that our parents' generation quite often say, well, you know, I'm 80 something now, so it doesn't really matter. But the reality is, you know, people are living longer. You saw that graph. People are living longer. People that you know, that are 80 are working and driving and doing all sorts of things. So, you know, it's all about your lifetime being able. My aim as a glaucoma specialist is so people can carry on doing the things they love and enjoy for as long as they're upright on 2 feet. You know, so I think your mum should be, whoever asked the question, you should you know, really emphasize and get a bit bossy with her. And that's my mum's strategy anyway. It sometimes works.
Great, thanks. And just to for everyone listening, if you are having any difficulties with your drops, you know, and sort of, or you're trying to help someone to take their drops, there is lots of help and support available. It can be really common for people to find it hard to put drops in for any reason. They struggle to remember, or they struggle to get the drop in their eye, or they struggle to squeeze the bottle. So if you're having any difficulties like that, don't forget we're here. We have our helpline, and you can ask questions or speak to your consultant, or call up the eye hospital and say that your eyes are sore, because it could be that they could change drops. So just to really clarify, do not suffer in silence if you're struggling with eye drops in any way. There's lots of help available, and please don't be afraid to seek it out and ask for it.
And I think that, just to sort of reiterate what Joanna said, there are lots of alternatives to eye drops. You don't have to, if something doesn't agree with you, please tell someone, and they can be changed. If you're on eye drops and they just don't agree with you, this is something where the laser we talked about, SLT, is a great option. It may mean that you need to use 2 drops instead of 3, or 1 instead of 2, and that I think that can make a huge difference. So just ask your consultant about the laser treatment if it's an option, if you're on lots of drops. But we don't want you to suffer. And there are there are things on the horizon. So there are research studies involving slow release products of drops. So it might require a little implant put in every 4 months or so. These are taking place at the moment. There are, we are recruiting to a couple of studies like this at Moorfields. It's obviously suspended at the moment, and that's something that if you're interested in the future, please let Joanna know, and I can reach out to you once some sense of normality kicks in again. Right, we better get on with these questions.
Yeah, we've got loads of questions. Right, we'll do our best to get through them all. So apart from regular eye examinations and taking eye drops, is there anything else people need to do?
No, I don't think there is at the moment. I think the crucial thing is using the treatment and making sure it agrees with you. But lots of people ask about is blood pressure related to it, is diabetes related to it, and the answer is we don't really know. If you look at the scientific literature, that you could find half a dozen arguments either way, to be honest. So the main thing about glaucoma is putting the drops in.
Yeah, great, thank you. Just to clarify, we've got quite a lot of questions coming through the chat function. If you could put them in the Q&A, that would be a bit easier, so they're all in one place. We can see them in the chat, so don't worry, but just if all questions come to the Q&A rather than the chat, that's a bit more straightforward for us. So next question, have all hospitals in the UK adopted the same post-COVID measures, or do you think they're likely to vary?
I think they're likely to vary depending on what other activity the hospital undertakes. So if you're at a big general hospital with medicine, surgical wards, etc., they will very likely have these, lots of these measures, because these are coming down from central government. And the specifics in eye clinics will vary, and it really depends on where the clinic is and how busy it is, etc. And we've written guidance from the UK and Ireland Area Glaucoma Society for the Royal College of Ophthalmologists, just giving some advice on what to think about for recovery. But the practicalities, I think, to be honest, we're sort of learning as we go along, trying to interpret national guidance with difficulty.
And I suspect also, is this right, that what might work for the next few months, it might well be different?
Yeah, so there are lots of things that we are all working on the assumption that there'll be a second peak at some point in the year. So we need to sort of make sure that we're prepared as best we can, and we have done, the people that are most at risk have been looked after prior to anything funny happening again. I mean, hopefully that won't be the case, but we just don't know.
You want to fear for the worst. Yeah, that makes sense. Next question. I have glaucoma in my right eye. Will this develop in both eyes?
Yeah, no, so Vicky, that's a really interesting question, and lots of people ask that. The answer is not necessarily. Now, in certain types of glaucoma, such as glaucoma where the pressure isn't high, what we call low tension glaucoma, you can have one eye that's quite markedly effective, and there's nothing wrong with the other eye. So it can be quite, asymmetrical from left to right. Now, the other reason for that may be that we talked about the damage happening as the cells leave the eyeball at that sort of natural point of weakness. Now, all of us are made differently. if you measure one leg, it's longer than the other, and we're all slightly different. So even our eyes are slightly different. So there may be some structural features at the optic nerve that are slightly different from one eye to the other. That means that one eye gets glaucoma and one doesn't. The honest answer is we don't know, but it's very common to have one eye hardly affected or not at all, and one eye affected. So fingers crossed, it'll just be the one eye for you.
Great, thank you. Another question about eye drops. So is there any advantage to closing my eyes for more than a minute after taking drops?
Personally, I think beyond a minute, I don't think it's necessary. One of the things that is very helpful to do is essentially, I think this is probably on the Glaucoma UK website, but we call it punctal occlusion. So after you put the drop in, essentially the tear ducts start at the inner part of the lower eyelid. So the best thing to do is, after you put the drop in, close your eyes and you sort of pinch the skin of around your nose and the bony bit and just push it upwards. And what that is doing is, it means that the eye drop doesn't get drained away through your tear ducts. It sort of stays in contact with the eye for longer, and therefore more of it should get absorbed. I think beyond a minute is, 1 minute is absolutely fine. And I think that would be effective.
And the other advantage of punctal occlusion is it, by keeping it in your eye, it stops it going down your nose and into the back of your throat, so you're less likely to taste it.
Yeah, so you don't get the funny taste, and in theory you'll get less potential side effects as well, because less will get absorbed. Ideal time of day to take drops, I think it depends on the type of drop that you're using. Typically, the common drops like latanoprost or bimatoprost, they're taken at night time. Typically, some beta blockers like timolols, they might be twice a day, they might be morning, but it really varies on the drop, on what your doctor's directed and what the specific molecule is. So it's difficult to give a broad answer for that, to be honest.
There's a similar question. So do I have to put my drops in at the same time every evening? I go to bed late, sometimes 2 in the morning, others 3:30, and usually put the drops in just before I go to bed.
So with the drops, let's say it's a once daily regime, you need to put them in roughly the same sort of time. But as I said, you need to live your life and do what you do. So there has to be some flexibility there. And I think, if you're plus or minus 2 to 3 hours of the time you would normally put them in, I think that's absolutely fine. The best thing is to try and find a routine. So it's sort of, you brush your teeth, put your drops in, go to bed, because that's what I find. It's sort of like me with my multivitamin tablets. It's like, unless I do it at a certain time of day, I'll forget. So it's adapting it to your lifestyle, but we want you to live your life around your life, not live your life around your drops.
It's a bit like a diet. The best diet is the one you stick to. So the best eye drop time is the time you remember to put it in.
That's very philosophical. I like that.
Thanks. Okay, we've got a few more questions. I've just been called by my opticians for my first eye test since my hospital visit about glaucoma. Presumably they won't do a pressure test on me. I'm not on drops because I'm awaiting cataract surgery.
To be honest, opticians, it's just part of their blanket screen. I think they will do a pressure test. They will do that to everybody. What they probably won't do is your field of vision test. Because I think if you have glaucoma, or you have a parent or sibling with glaucoma, you're entitled to a comprehensive glaucoma screening free on the NHS once a year. I think they will check your pressure. I think it's like part of their bread and butter, which is the amazing thing now.
Yeah, it's a quick test to do, isn't it? And it's always useful to have a bit of extra data, because pressures can change a bit over the day.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. So the more data you have, the better for the people to see what your actual pressure range is like and how high it is. Another question: does oversleeping affect glaucoma? Let's make that a bit more general. What's the relationship between sleep and glaucoma?
So the way to interpret that is there are natural sort of variations in blood pressure and eye pressure throughout the day. So we know that your eye pressure can be sort of higher at certain times of the day. We know your blood pressure can dip at night. Now, the danger for some types of glaucoma is if you have higher eye pressure and low blood pressure. because then that might put your optic nerve at more risk. So in theory, that's how I would interpret that question. But in terms of oversleeping, if you need a lie-in, as long as you put your drops in, I think it's fine. That would be my main worry, is if you overslept and forgot to put your glaucoma drops in. But I don't think oversleeping is actually a problem.
Great, thank you. And a question that we get quite often: are any dietary choices likely to affect glaucoma and how it develops?
So again, this sort of, I mentioned about the potential idea that vitamin B3 may be protective to the optic nerve. We haven't got concrete evidence there, but there is a lot of work that has been done on sort of antioxidants and mitochondria, which are sort of the energy cells of the human body. Because what we do know is the optic nerve is, if you had I want to think how to explain this. So if you had a sort of a heat plot of what's the most metabolically active bit of the human body, you'd probably think the heart or the brain or something like that. But actually, the optic nerve is unbelievable. The turnover of bodily metabolic activity at the optic nerve is really, really high. So there's a lot of thought that antioxidants may have a role in a protective treatment. So I think really just healthy living, healthy balanced diets. I don't think there is any harm. The only one I would suggest looking at is vitamin B3. I don't know if there's any recommended dosage, and again, there isn't formal evidence to say that this helps, but hopefully we'll have that answer for you in a couple of years.
Great, thank you. There's a question, I don't know whether you can see my hands. Can glaucoma patients do, is that LASIK or PRK?
Yeah, I think it's saying can they have LASIK or PRK surgery? They can. I would discourage that, because both of those surgeries do a couple of things. One is if there are complications, it can potentially impact how we can monitor your field of vision. The other really confusing thing is both of those surgeries make the cornea thinner. So when you have a thinner cornea, it impacts what your eye pressure readings are. So it can complicate the monitoring of glaucoma as well. But in theory, yes, glaucoma patients can have that treatment. The typical thing that happens is they have that treatment, and the glaucoma is picked up later. So we see that quite frequently. Now, if a patient has glaucoma, and I would probably discourage them from having that treatment. For one reason is that for LASIK surgery, there is a period of time where there is a huge amount of pressure and suction on the eye. It may only be for a minute or two, but I just don't think that's a sensible risk to take for somebody who we know has glaucoma. I mean, the pressure would be maybe 70 or 80 millimeters of mercury for half a minute or so, and that's fine for a normal healthy eye, but I wouldn't subject an eye that is known to have glaucoma to that risk. And
LASIK is for refractive surgery, is that right, for people? Yeah. So the people, if they're short-sighted, then they don't need to wear glasses anymore. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. I enjoy Pilates. Now, there is the only restriction on exercise is after surgery. So, after glaucoma surgery, we sort of say, don't bend over for a week or so. After cataract surgery, we'll say don't do any heavy lifting for a week. But after a diagnosis of glaucoma, there are absolutely no restrictions on Pilates, yoga, exercise. You can do everything, even gymnastics, etc. People have done some studies about what happens to eye pressure when you do things like, do Pilates and yoga. And even, I think somebody did a study on mountain climbing as well, what happens to your eye pressure. And there are changes, but there's nothing significant. So live your life and enjoy it and do the things you love. Great.
We've had a few questions, as I said, in the chat channel as well. So we had one, well, this one was via Facebook actually, from Marion. I've got glaucoma in both eyes, but I also have cataracts on top. I was told a few years ago that removing the cataracts could make the glaucoma worse. What are your views on this?
So actually, removing the cataract will very likely make the glaucoma better. It'll be a positive thing. And the two reasons for that are, one is cataract surgery will lower your eye pressure by 3 to 5 millimeters of mercury for 3 to 5 years. Second thing is cataract. Once you've had your cataract done, your doctor will be able to monitor your glaucoma much better, because you'll be much better at the visual field tests, because you'll see the little light clearly. So you'll have much more reliable info on how your condition's doing. So cataract surgery is very common in glaucoma patients. One of the things we do quite frequently now is, if a patient has cataracts, and that, let's say, they're using eye drops as well, we can also put small little stents in at the end of surgery. So it adds 5 minutes to the cataract operation, and it may, you might use 3 drops before, you might use 1 after, you might use 2 drops before, might use none after. So these are little things that, it's sort of right place, right time. If you're having a cataract operation, we now have the ability to do other little things that can hopefully get rid of your eye drops, which I know all of you would love to do.
Great. Just quickly, by the way, we've got a few minutes left, so I'm going to hopefully launch a poll to sort of see where we've got to now. So this poll will just run for the last few minutes.
There's one question on here from Valerie saying, I was told that I have a deep cup. What does that mean? What that means is, when your doctor is looking with the bright light at the back of your eye, the donut eye, which is the optic nerve, the sort of hole in the donut looks quite deep, and it's difficult to know what that means, because everyone is different. Like, I know that I've got deep cups, and that's only because it's very common, with people of Indian origin. So I know that I've got deep cups, but I don't have glaucoma. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. The question to ask is not so much what does my cup look like. I would say, what do my field of vision tests look like? And when I see patients, I do find it's helpful to show patients the fields, so you understand what we're looking at. And the other thing is, lots of hospitals now use technology that can monitor fields over time, so we can plot nice graphs about how things are changing or not changing. And these are all advances in technology that are there to help doctors, but I actually think they help our patients understand why we say what we say, if that makes sense. So one of the things that is always upsets me is the clinics used to be so busy that everyone's in a bit of a rush. But if you've got questions, just ask them, because that's what we're there for. And the other thing is, Glaucoma UK support services is just amazing, and the amount of resources on there are quite something. So really, have a look around the website, because there's a huge. I mean, for example, at Moorfields, the information leaflets I use for my surgical patients are the old IGA ones, which I'm sure I need to throw out and have the new rebranded ones. But the information booklets are really comprehensive.
Great. Right, so we've got a few more lurking in the chat function. What can I say with the last couple of minutes? So someone's glaucoma appointment has been cancelled. It was due to be on the 13th of August. This is an impossible question, I think, but what guidance can you give? When can I expect to get one?
Right. So the way that I can explain what we're doing at Moorfields. So what's happened is, we have, at the start of the pandemic, we emptied all of our clinics, and we have all of our patients on a database. Now, a lot of them have manually been monitored by the consultants to say, so we've identified anyone that's at higher risk already, and we've seen those. Now, everyone else, it's like a two-pronged effort. So there's an element of manual sort of risk stratification. And the other thing we've done is we've asking our computers to look for words that could indicate things that would make us worried. So it searches all the patient letters and patient notes, and then that assigns a risk category. And then the most important thing is, when were you last seen? So we balance up the patient's risk from when their last appointment was, and we'll then organise an appointment accordingly. At the moment, we are currently working through the 40,000 appointments we didn't get through from March to July. So we are, it's difficult to say. I know that at Moorfields we're trying to call people as often as we can. The problem is we have only been able to reopen about a third of our sites at the moment. So we're still running at sort of 30%. My feeling is that if your appointment's in August, I suspect you will, and I'm going to make the assumption that your glaucoma has been stable before. You've maybe seen twice a year and you're on 1 or 2 drops. I suspect that your appointment will be maybe October, November.
I think that the slight feeling we're working on is if you haven't heard or your appointment's been cancelled, it's not the worst news, because actually it means the doctor thinks your glaucoma is quite stable. Can we say that?
I know that as a patient I wouldn't want to hear that, but speaking from the other side, you know, we have a list of every patient with glaucoma and all of their details and all of their disease status, etc. And if you don't hear from us, it means your glaucoma is stable.
Yeah, so no news is good news.
So you know, the ones that we have contacted already to come in are ones we're worried about.
Right, sorry, just last 2 points really quickly. We had another comment on Facebook. Due to undergo my second trabeculectomy on the 5th of August, is there any other form of surgery that's less, I think that should say intrusive? Also had cataract surgery prior to this, but it failed, so I may have to have a repeat trab in the left eye. He has to wear a mask at all times because he works in a hospital. So can wearing a mask increase the pressure? And is there a trab? Is there another alternative that's less intrusive than a trab?
So to my knowledge, I think wearing the masks I'm not aware that can increase the eye pressure. There are alternatives to trabeculectomy. One of the I'm going to type it in the chat box so you can Google it and have a look. So there is. Oh, has everyone seen that, or no? I've done it too.
Yeah, we can see. I think Rachel can put that onto.
So there is a new. Well, it's not new because it's been around for about 3-4 years now. There's a small little device called the PreserFlow, which is a little microshunt. Now, this is quite interesting because the company that produces it is a Japanese company called Santen, and most companies are a little bit sneaky. They won't sort of actually do a trial of new product versus current gold standard, i.e. trabeculectomy. They will sort of try and market it through sneaky ways. That's my cynical take on it. What Santen did was they actually organised a proper clinical trial comparing this thing called the PreserFlow against trabeculectomy, which we've been doing for 50, 60 years and is still the gold standard. And the reason they did that was, I think, the American licensing authorities wanted that sort of information. Now, Moorfields was a site for that study, so several of us were, investigators on that clinical trial, and so we've been using these for 3-4 years, and it can be very effective actually. So for certain types of glaucoma, not for what we call low tension or normal tension glaucoma, but for higher pressure glaucoma, it's a good alternative to a trabeculectomy. It has a much quicker sort of visual recovery because there's less stitching, and the operation time for one of these is probably about half an hour compared to about an hour for trabeculectomy. So that's something that is available. It's not widely available in the UK at all units yet, to my knowledge, but there are things on the horizon.
And things might change, mightn't it? Like the guidance from
always new things on the horizon.
Yeah, right. And then the last bit, which is a sort of comment really, and again via Facebook, thanks for giving up the time to talk about glaucoma. My son has Sturge-Weber syndrome and sees the marvellous Professor Kaur and his team at Moorfields. Yep. Our concern is lifetime of sight since he was born with Sturge-Weber and he had glaucoma when he was born, and at 13 he's already partially sighted. So, what's the lifetime risk? And also he was due to have examinations under general anaesthetic because day trips weren't successful. So will that still be possible, do you think?
Yeah. So let me just explain what Sturge-Weber is to everybody else. So Sturge-Weber is a condition where you have some abnormal blood vessels. It's usually on one side, and it can be evolved around the eye. So you might have a sort of it looks like a sort of red-coloured mole on the face. You can have associated lesions like this, abnormal blood vessels within the parts of the brain as well. Now, the reason it causes glaucoma is that because of it's affecting the blood supply, it means that there's a lot of resistance to fluid coming out of the eye. So the eye, as a consequence, you can't get rid of fluid that leaves the eye, so the eye pressure goes up. and there is a risk of high pressure and glaucoma. Now, when if sturge weber is picked up and the eye is affected very early on in life, then the outcome is less good compared to if it was something that was detected later in life, or maybe lots of our patients with sturge weber may just have drops and may not need surgery. But if something needs surgery at a younger age, that usually means that the pressure is very high and there are signs of nerve damage. In terms of, what was the next bit of the question about the anaesthetic?
So can we still do exams under general anaesthetic?
So general anaesthetics, we still do general anaesthetics now at Moorfields. There is a whole, as you can imagine, general anaesthetic is a whole different ball game now post-COVID. So, initially people were worried, everyone was thinking about what's an aerosol generating procedure. So, what sort of spreads the virus and could spread it in the air. Initially, people were worried about cataract surgery. So that's why most units stopped cataract surgery for the last 3 to 4 months, because they were worried about that. Now, the most aerosol generating procedure in a hospital is general anesthesia. So the process of putting a breathing tube in and taking a breathing tube out is the highest risk. So obviously we are testing patients and staff. If a patient needs a general anesthesia, the patient and their household have to isolate for 14 days prior to attending and have a COVID test. When we have a general anesthesia, it takes 2 anaesthetists per case rather than 1. So you have 2 consultant anaesthetists in the room. And what happens is you go into the room and they seal the theatres for 20 minutes after the breathing tube's been placed in, because that's when it's thought that the particles are around, are circulating. So all of the staff are in full PPE for that 20 minutes after intubation. There's 2 consultant anaesthetists in the room at all times. And after the breathing tube's taken out, there's a further 20 minutes where the theatre is locked, no one can enter or leave, and then you're out again. So the implications of that is, if we have a general anaesthetic, we are only doing it when it's absolutely necessary. I had one case that was done under general anaesthetic, a trabeculectomy yesterday, and it was supposed to start at 10:30 and we started at 12, and it's a real challenge. So we are limiting the number of general anaesthetic cases unless we absolutely have to do them. But if you're for children's glaucoma, or somebody has learning disabilities, then that's a different ballgame. We have to do it, so we will make it work. But it's just an organisational challenge, really. But I'm glad I just wanted to explain the reason behind it, from a behind the scenes point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot to consider. I think the last question, because we're running out of time, Harry, perhaps you could answer Mohammed his question personally. Right, thank you so much. I'm sorry we've overrun, but we had loads of really great questions there, and it was really nice to be able to answer them. So thank you very much, Harry, for giving up your time.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Fantastic. I've really enjoyed it.
And then thank you everyone for joining. And one thing I did say to Joanna is that, in terms of, we would love you all to get involved with research, just to hear your views and opinions. And once our sort of website is up and running at Moorfields, we will get in touch with Joanna and Glaucoma UK, and we would love you all to get involved, because Glaucoma UK and Moorfields have worked closely together for many years, and I think Joanna, just to congratulate you on organising it. I think it's a great initiative. I hope everyone's enjoyed it and found it useful.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really nice to see lots of attendees. Just a reminder, we've got more sessions coming up, so do register for those, and answer the poll if you haven't done so already, so we can see the answers and how much you've got out of the session. And there will be a survey monkey when you leave the session that will sort of pop up on your browser. Be really grateful if you could fill that in. We hope you've really enjoyed it. If you have any comments, questions, or things that have arisen that sort of come up over the next few days, do please get in touch. We'd love to hear any feedback, or do contact our helpline if you have any questions at all. So we'll call it a day there, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.